everybody, it's Matt Stranick here, and really grateful to have everybody who may happen to be watching this at some poorly defined time in the future. This is the first in a special summer, what I guess, series within a series. That's what we're calling it, a series within a series. It's a summer series within a series here on Writers on Writing. This is actually the first in what's hopefully going to be five or six interviews between now and Labor Day. So they're all pretty significant. And I am so friggin' stoked to have Andy Coulter. Did I say that properly?
You
I'm
did.
taking a run at a name which I'm pronouncing maybe for the first time to the person, maybe not. Andy is a extremely well-known, interesting person. Well known as in you worked significantly in the music entertainment industry before sort of, I guess, pivoting into where you are now, working as an associate, or I'm not even going to say the name of your role. You can say it if you want, relative to an academic position, right? And so I'm really glad you're here because I know that you have the new book out, right, on punk legends. They're considered Northern California, right? AFI.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, right, since 1991, right? Legit punk, post-punk, post-hardcore, all that stuff. Still going strong, hugely influential band. With a dedicated, motivated fan base and just fascinating story to be sure. And you, Andy, are the person who is on record as writing about these dudes, as well as a really significant. I think it's significant because of the 33 and a third series book. Now, for folks who don't know, 33 and a third series is actually legendary for rock nerds, for people who follow rock criticism. They have established such a cool area, such a cool niche, you want to call it, of really short, punchy, informative, well researched, well interviewed series on, very legit musical artists. Everybody from Fugazi to the Replacements to Suicide, which is where Andy comes in. New York, post punk weirdos extraordinaire, right? Those two.
They
In a
predate
way,
punk almost, so it's hard to call them post-punk if they predate punk.
wow. Well, again, I'm happy to be corrected on any aspect of this stuff whatsoever. Your knowledge is certainly far and away superior to mine. I'm just thrilled and stoked to, first of all, meet you for the first time in person and
Anytime.
also have a chat about what you're all up to. So, I guess, Andy, again, thanks for being here so much. If you want to just start with, in terms of these questions for the interview series here, why don't you maybe just take us through your current city and your current role, just for context, just for people who are encountering you and or your work for the first time.
Okay, can I start with my background a little and then jump to where I am instead?
Please go for it. Anything at all. Whatever you want the people to know. This is what the show is
So
about,
it's a
right?
little full
What you want
circle
people to.
moment, which is why I say so. So I went to school at UVA. Actually went to Penn originally, and then I transferred to UVA. And I was here during the Pavement years, and I was here during the Dave Matthew years. For people in America, they will remember he had residencies every Tuesday before Under the Table and Dreaming came out. We were all here for that. If anybody's seen the new Pavements documentary, there's a long section on the early Silver Jews and Malcolm X
I
partnership
haven't.
with UVA.
That movie looks so good. That looks
It's
so cool.
it's fascinating, and it's actually, I'm sure we're going to get to some of my writing, but there's a way that Alex Ross Perry articulates and thinks about hagiography that I think is very similar to my own, and it may not be for everyone, and it's one of those really fine line. This could go either way at any time. This could blow up and be terrible, or it could be fabulous. And in his case, it was fabulous. So he came and debuted it here at the UVA Film Festival back in fall. So when I say here, I am back in Charlottesville. So I started my
Gotcha.
music career here. I worked at 3WV. I did not work at the cool TJU with all the college kids, but I did see a lot of shows at Trax, RIP. And then I went to work for PC Music out in San Diego, which is a sort of eclectic label that was there at the time. It is not the electronica label that is more famous now. And then
The man without a music background is raising his hand to ask a sub question.
Sure.
So is it fair to say that you were involved sort of in A&R, artist and repertoire kind of activities? I mean, what sort of
No, not
what
as
does
a
the kind of
college.
work that you're describing involve per se?
No, not as a college student, an intern at a label. I mean, they would love like if you went out and explored things and you would come back to them. But mostly if you're that level, you're doing everything else. You're working at
You're
the
just
radio
kind of keeping
station.
the office running for people. Is that it? Or
No. I mean, when I worked at the radio station, you were out in the field almost always. So like the radio DJs would be back in the station and you would be out in the field doing
oh,
all kinds of embarrassing things because you're the person that is there to do the embarrassing things. And
gotcha.
famously, I remember, again, I worked for the rock station here, which shockingly still exists in the year 2025. And I remember
Thank
they
God,
sent me
though, right?
out to see
Yeah.
this new band, Matchbox 20, and Jewel was headlining. And I remember there were a lot of roughneck kind of people at that show for some reason. And she was yodeling at the time. And so she started in on that. And there was some guy who just yelled at her, like, take your shirt off. And me, as the just horrified radio person, was blanching. And she doesn't mess around. She just changed from that high pitched yodeling until I don't know if I can swear in your podcast, but she
You
put
can
him
do
in
whatever you want.
she put him in his place pretty quickly. So that's the kind of stuff I did. And then when I got to a label, it was more like calling radio stations and getting your band played. I mean, trying to make relations with radio stations all over the country when radio was sort of one of those things that would break artists. I mean, obviously now it's podcasts and other things.
Totally right. Yeah.
But back in the day, radio had, MTV had like a really significant place in the music industry. And then I came to the 930 Club, which is a seminal punk club that originated at downtown DC and then moved in 96 to where they are now on V Street.
I have heard of the 930 Club, right?
Yeah.
And if we're talking DC and we're talking that era,
Yeah.
then I mean, we're talking Rites of Spring, we're talking,
Yeah.
I mean, we're
Mhm.
talking,
Yep. All the Discord boys
all
were
that,
there. Mhm. Yep.
all
Yeah.
those dudes. See, that is tight. That is highly tight. That
Right.
is the kind of thing where dudes who are out there now, like in, I don't know, hot water music or, like whatever's popular now, the current acts, they look at that stuff and go, man, that lines up roughly, as good as the Descendants, right? Or like, it's
Well,
like
right.
with Discord, it's kind of the era, and everything to do with DC of that era is tight. I love all those bands. I bought all their music in multiple formats over the years. Hi, Ian.
I
If
will.
you're
I will. I
listening,
will tell
I'm sure
them you
you're
said.
not, but
I will tell them you said so. They're all playing for anybody who sees this early, a 40th anniversary for Positive Force. So tonight is a whole bunch of post-punk bands. Tomorrow, actually, Girls Against Boys is headlining. The Mezetics are there. Bedmaker is there. So all the gang.
aesthetics.
Yep. So all of the
Love it.
gang from all the years are showing up. Actually, it's a whole summer festival, but the 4 weeks are supporting Positive Force's efforts. And Mark Anderson, I cannot say enough glowing things about.
That is sick.
Anyway,
That's
so full
folks,
circle. I worked in DC.
some of you are hearing this here first. I don't know who you are, but some of you are hearing that here first. Thank you. That is awesome.
So I'm really excited for those shows. I'm really excited to see everybody. It's sort of like a DC reunion. And it actually, again, once we get there, works into the project that I'm working on now. But yes, I worked at the 930 Club. That's one of those jobs where you do kind of everything. And it was pretty punk when I was there. It was 4 or 5 of us working full time, more rats than people most of the time. And we put together things with a shoestring and a budget. I remember our production manager coming to me one day and he's like, I hear the internet's going to be big. And he threw like a coding book at me and said, build us a website or do something. And I think that was 98, maybe 7. So we did not have a GeoCities site, but we did have a really run of the mill, run down, bare bones site, which is sort of how we did everything back in the day. And now, I mean, they're a humongous entity that is has a punk rock history, but maybe not punk rock place in the industry anymore. Anyway, long story long. So I did that for a number of years. And then I went back to, as you mentioned, grad school, got a PhD in musicology and English. wrote on communities, spaces, and cities, and the music scenes that sort of create them, which is a reason that a lot of my books are sort of city-centric. So Suicide being a lot about New York City and how noise music informs and is brought about community in the downtown New York scene. AFI, as you mentioned, being from Ukiah, and then down in the Gilman, San Francisco scene, which is very, very, very similar to the old 930 Club. That play there. We've sort of, I mean, you know, there was a sort of like a handbook that got passed around for all the bands. Like, here's where you go.
And so, and again, just sort of, if I may, because you know way more about this than me. I mean, again, speaking again contemporaneously of the era, right, of Gilman, if we're talking, you know, mid to late 80s, early 90s kind of thing, when sort of stuff is germinating out of there. I mean, again, for the casual literary listener who doesn't necessarily know very much about punk subculture music, you are talking about, you know, early variants of Green Day. You are talking about Operation Ivy.
When they were called Street Children.
Right. You're talking about like Mike Park and Asian Man Records, still a huge, vibrant friggin' part of the NorCal scene relative to that area.
And
still
Lookout
doing
Ricker.
stuff out there. Right.
And
Sam I Am.
Right? Yeah.
Sam I Am is literally one of my favorite rock bands of all time. They're closely associated with that place. And they're actually on the singer's birthday. I'm sorry, singer for Sam I Am. I don't remember your first name. Jason, right? They're having on his birthday, they're having a gig there, right? I think. So that is just sick.
So for anybody listening, this is not a pitch on my book. I highly recommend The Oral History of the Bay Area Scene. I'm blanking on the name, but I will get it to you. You can put it in the notes. But yes, that goes through all of those.
That's awesome.
Really era. But the DIY spirit in DC, I would call them sister cities between DC and San Francisco at the time. They really were sort of like DNA replicas. And so the DIY in the sense that like kids worked for these places. I mean, literal 12-year-olds helped shape and build Gilman, and kids worked not in a paying sense, but you know, DC was one of the few cities in America that had all ages. It was very uncommon, still is kind of uncommon to have all ages show, and the 930 Club really leaned into that, and that's why we got a lot of the early punk bands that we did, and that's why there's such a fierce feeling and protection of that community, because kids literally grew up there.
I understand.
Yeah.
Well, and again, right, the personalities, because I mean, that's where you go, wow, all those dudes, more or less, and women folk, obviously, everybody who's involved with that whole crew, like, seems to have aged really well over the years relative to the cultural endeavor. I mean, if you look at like any of those dudes, right? You look at like all the, you know, like Ian Mackay adjacent stuff, you know, like Dag Nasty. You look at, I mean, just, you know, it's just like all the musical acts and associated documented stuff through Discord. And I mean, they're not the only label, I'm sure, right, out of there, but they're the most well known. All that stuff. You look at it musically now, it still slaps, first of all, as vital, powerful music, but then just as like decent people being cool to each other, it stands up, and they're still trading on those relationships. They're still like just being cool and putting out rad music and kind of documenting it as they go. It's absolutely incredible.
Beyond that, both scenes had a real philosophy to the music, meaning that they obviously get paid, but like most of the money goes to charities. Like all the Positive Force stuff this weekend goes to charity. Much of the Discord shows were never over $5 historically and have never been over $5. And all of the money that is raised from the films like Salad Days and We Are Fugazi that came out in 2023, they're actually showing a lot of those at the AFI in sort of, there's a whole sort of repertoire going on in the next couple of weeks. But all of that money has always historically gone to charity, and Ian and et al. Is very protective and you know, thinks it's part of the community that he grew up with. And
well, and because they're, and again, I know we're going way off script here, but I just find this stuff so fascinating because you have studied the cities, you have studied, you know, the widely kind of known areas. I mean, George Pelecanos is a freaking incredible crime writer out of DC, like crime novelist. He references Positive Force stuff all the time in his books. He just picks it up and speaks to it. Like,
he references everything from the area and the DMV. But yes he does.
He is just a George.
The person
I would be flattered and honored if you ever were to consider being on the show. since we're on the topic.
He's
But
around.
honestly, though, and
He was at the AFI not that long ago in up in Maryland. So.
really,
Mhm.
really.
Yeah, he's around.
See, I love hearing this stuff because like I'm just this like dude from Atlanta, Canada, who's gone around the world, been around Canada. I've got a very strong, powerful personal relationship, commercially, personally, and in any other kind of way to American contemporary punk music. It's been part of my, literally part of my DNA as a person since I was, 14 or 13 or whatever, when I first encountered it. And I still take that stuff seriously. I still live my life through that stuff in a weird way. And so just when you see other people on the same path and you start saying, oh, you know about Gilman, some, because I mean, this stuff, these scenes that you reference are still very, like the people who know about them are everywhere and we know about it deeply and passionately. But like the majority of like just mainstream music people, I don't know, like people who go to a fucking Carpenter concert or something or whatever, just this stuff may as well not even exist, right? So it's funny how it's just sort of like underground that still kind of stayed underground a bit relative to a wider public consciousness is what it seems like to me. But maybe
The Boy
you know
Genius
something.
girls wear a lot of Discord shirts, so I think mainstream contemporary
Do
pop. I
they?
mean, and I don't
Okay.
know. I would argue Taylor Swift probably does it
I'm
too.
just putting a random name out there. I mean, I could have said, like George Thorogood and the Destroyers, but I mean, I don't think they tour anymore.
Yeah, no, but I
So,
mean, I
right?
think your contemporary pop is maybe a step like too far or something. But I mean, it's surprising actually how many of contemporary pop stars, especially women, do know the Discord bands. I mean, the boys
Are
always seem
picking
to
it
know
up, yeah.
the bands, so I'm never surprised when a punk band or like Mannequin Pussy references them. But I am
Well, I
always
am
surprised
so
when Boy Genius.
glad to hear that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
I mean, that's
awesome. And
how
I'm
I
not
look.
trying to, I'm not trying to denigrate anybody. I'm not trying to put anybody down. Just, I'm
No,
grabbing
no,
a name
no.
out
I
of the
just
brain,
think it's
right?
nice because there's not always a pipeline to learning. I mean, now we have the internet, but when I was growing up, it was, you would see Kurt Cobain wearing a shirt and you were like, oh, I got to look who's television or, oh,
I
I gotta
know,
go
right?
follow. So it's nice to see contemporary artists still doing that and featuring the things that influence and they love. And hopefully that knowledge passes on.
Well, and if I may, I mean, again, just I thought of this while you were sort of referencing, the positive force and opening for, putting your shows on for charity. I see the band from Baltimore, Turnstile, doing quite a lot of that.
Well, that's all over my AFI book,
Right.
obviously. And
Turnstile to me are like the best possible logical conclusion of where this music should even be going. I'm a huge fan of them. Well, I mean, for Gen Z people picking it up for the first time, to me, they're doing a pretty darn good job.
oh
I
yeah,
just I look at it, for people who like I don't know if they're Gen Z or they're like very cusp late millennials, whatever. They're 10 years at least younger than me, 15 years younger than me, probably. God, I'm old. I'm really old. But I mean, again, right? Just I think about the social milieu, right? You think about the social milieu of Washington, troubled, gun violence, right? A lot of urban problems. A bit is what people put out there. Is that the case or no?
when are you speaking of a time in particular? Are you talking about the
Well,
riots in the
okay.
60s? Or are you talking
Well,
about the
okay. I
80s?
guess the way that it's tended to be portrayed in contemporary media, American media, I don't know, television and movies, which is what we get up here in Canada, it seems like people kind of mention DC and Baltimore as sort of being
Oh, you're talking
relatively
about
similarly
The
close.
Wire? Is that what you're
The
talking about?
Wire.
Okay.
Speaking of George Pelicanos, this is kind of, I mean, I'm not saying I got everything I know about. Anyway, perhaps this is an unfair cultural generalization of which I'm speaking. Possibly. So again, on terms of background, I really appreciate knowing some information here. You're really sharing some cool stuff. I guess in terms of where you're located right now and what you're up to relative to your role as an academic and a writer with significant cultural projects, I guess, first of all, what do you like about where you currently are, just as a city and a town? What do you like about what your role is? What do you sort of get to do within your role as a teacher, researcher, cultural person, writer? What are you working on now, perhaps, and what do you enjoy about what you get to do?
I mean, I guess I'm thankful for the freedom that my job allows, in the sense that I can construct the classroom for the most part, and that I get the ability to use my music and marketing acumen in ways that influence the entertainment industry. And that's pretty broad. So I teach the entertainment industry, including music, film, sports, and that includes dance and theater. Those aren't my areas of expertise, but obviously those are part of the coursework. So I'm very lucky in the sense that we get to do that. I work at a very small school now. I've always worked at very large schools, so it's interesting being at a very small school and a very rural small school. I've never lived in a rural place. It may not be for me every day. I am much more a city kid. I grew up in cities. I've always lived in cities. So that's
You got to negotiate with it a little bit.
yeah, it's a cultural shock for me to live in more green than gray. But in terms of the job, it affords me a real flexibility in teaching broadly. Like, I've created two different minors there. So there's an arts management minor for those that are doing sort of arts to give them the business acumen. So I've always worked in business schools, and my background is obviously in marketing. So I'm very interested in making sure that if you're going to go in the arts, that I give you the tools, especially now that it's so self-defined. Whereas like back in the day, you may have
Yeah.
had a manager, AR, publicist, all those things are now in one, and you're sort of expected to do them all. And so my job is to make sure that you understand that. And when you're putting together your press kits and when you're doing your tracking of algorithmic numbers, you understand all of the data that's coming into you and how to utilize that and how to read contracts. We have a pretty good law school. I mean, we have great law school. I shouldn't say pretty good, a great law school that helps kids understand IP and also contracts. And this is also true for the athletes. So part of what I do is sports management, and I played 2 Division I sports, and I understand the challenges that are coming with, or have come to, a lot of Division I schools, not so much with our school, in terms of the paying of players. And some states in the US have actually trickled down to high school players. And I'm not sure the kind of financial literacy that some of these kids who are getting thrown money at 16, 15. I mean, in Georgia, it can go, if you're a good football player at 14, those people are coming after you for sponsorship already. So part of my job is really to make sure that those sort of
Send my kid down there, my 14-year-old.
Yeah, well, he's got a lot of competition in Georgia, but yeah, it's a really developing area, and so I'm lucky to be sort of on the cusp of the discussions like that. People don't think of Division III as being very viable, and I think that there really is. I think if women have said anything, there's so many women that do well in the space. A lot of that has to do with social media, so really understanding how to leverage your social media is great for my job, and so those are the things I like about my day-to-day, I guess.
Again, what you just sort of described to me, because I've spent like a fair amount of time in the curriculum space. I spent a fair amount of time on course design and learning design. And I'll be real, I relish the opportunity to put together a new course. I think it's neat for me. It's just like a Lego kit. And so when you are talking about being able to sort of have, these minors that you get to develop and sort of develop some really meaningful, significant educational programming for students who are, looking for direction, looking for something to hang their professional hat on, right? When they get out the door, I think those kinds of experiential, highly, industry keyed program areas are dope, to use a term. And I respect the shit out of people who are involved in that stuff immensely, just, from an educator standpoint. So it seems like you really got a lot going on in terms of significant cultural activities, which to me, I mean, people say that stuff is adjacent. I see it as all being sort of a part of a wider, broader cultural imprint, which is both dynamic and multifaceted. And so your educational practice area of it, to me, as a pretty high level educator over a pretty long amount of time, is significantly of interest. So again, I appreciate you sharing that. Really, that's. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess now, speaking just perhaps a bit to, your sort of, you have 2 published music books out in the world, right? The 33 and a third awesome looking book on suicide, right? Legendary. I sort of mentioned post-punk. You were like pre-punk. They are completely unique, trailblazing New York City-based artists. I think we can agree. And I guess, first of all, again, if you want to maybe just talk about what you enjoyed and what perhaps led to that, and then maybe perhaps by way of compare and contrast, right, relative to, the significant current, more current, at least chronologically, work on the band AFI.
Sure. So when I worked at the 930 Club, so I was a marketing director for a decade over there. One of the things I did as my side hustle, as the kids call it, was I was a music writer. However, being a music writer and being the director of marketing at a music club is a little bit of a conflict of interest. So I went under a writer's name. Most of what I wrote was mostly European stuff. I wrote a lot about industrial bands for Sideline and Revolution, and a lot of more industrial acts. But I'd always wanted to write a longer sort of biography about music. And music biography at the time, of course, they were throwing money at almost anybody. And when the economy was sort of tanking here, I was in San Francisco at the time for Live Nation. I was the Northern California, so all the way up to Fresno, all the way down to, I guess, like sort of baseline San Francisco. I did all of the marketing for all of their venues, so including Shoreline and then
That is a heavy imprint
the
in
historic
that area, right?
Fillmore.
That is.
Yeah, well, I mean, Bill Graham was my hero as a kid, so and coming from the 930, I don't think I could have worked for Live Nation if it had been anything else than Bill Graham's company, his specific city. I think Seth, my boss at the 930, would have excommunicated me and never spoken to me again. But I started speaking to Neil Strauss, who wrote a lot of the biographies that I really liked at the time. I mean, maybe I don't know that history has aged some of that really well, but he was a New York Times writer and was a best-selling author. And I was sort of talking to him about what to do. And he was encouraging that I should go back to grad school if I really wanted to write a book. Of course, now in hindsight, I'm not sure that was the best advice. I don't know that one needs to go to grad school to write a book, but that is ultimately what I did when I lost my job at Live Nation due to the economic downturn in America. So when I did that, I kind of knew that I wanted to write. I knew I wanted to write on suicide. I didn't really think anyone would take me at 33 1/3 when I had originally started, mostly because the book publishing industry, it's not so much necessarily like how interesting the project is always. Like, you have to be able to market yourself and you have to be a name. And most of the people at the time who had written, like Jonathan Latham and stuff, were super, super, uber, duper famous. I couldn't really compete with that level of fame. And so, as you say, the 33 1/3 series is really small books based on seminal albums. So it's one album, and it really is not a biography in any way, shape, or form. They are very fluid in the way they allow writers to do the project, but to sort of like shed a little light on it.
They're doing it to spec, right? They're doing it to a very specific. It seems like they want a very kind of specific thing from those books.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. They don't. And I will say the readers might, but the writers have a lot of freedom in how they frame the book. And so some are oral history, awesome. Like Joe Gross's Fugazi is oral history, but like the Metallica one that was written by a musician is fiction. And so although I will say, again, the readers are the ones who sort of get a little, their feathers rifled when they don't have sort of the kinds of things that they're looking for. I think that when I was going into and writing about noise music in grad school, I got a lot of pushback. I was usually the only woman in the space. I was pretty used to this in the music industry. I was always the only woman in the boardroom. I never had another marketing person who was also a woman in my field. And so it wasn't surprising to be in a room with all men and have a lot of pushback, but it got to a point where the gatekeeping was, I find, problematic. You had a band that I felt was really fascinating and themselves wouldn't be as gatekeeping as their fans. And so I wanted to write the most accessible book possible for what people considered the least accessible music. And so that was sort of part of my thesis. It has not been a favorite of some staunch music fans who really wanted me to write in a different type of way. But that was really important to me because I felt like women were, if you didn't know certain things or you didn't, even LCD Sound System name checks them in a way that makes it sound like if you don't know these sort of like, you can't find a Liquid album, if you don't know, the beat track or the rarity on the 1978 live album from Suicide, then you're not real in some ways. And so many people had written about them really authoritatively about their music. So I really wanted to make it for people who I didn't think would ever heard of them, but might have heard of the Ramones or might have heard of like the Sex Pistols, but would never have heard of Suicide. And so I tried to make it, again, a story about the album. Again, so I wrote in literary nonfiction. So again, not the typical.
That is awesome. What a wonderful genre to operate in.
Again,
take a subject you care about.
Debatable from a lot of the noise community, but I've had like 80-year-old mothers or book club readers say, I don't know anything about this band, but we read your book. And I think that, to me, that's the most inspiring. So that's how that book came about.
I'm not like a huge fan of professional sports or anything, but I read those books sometimes, right? I'll pick up just like, a book about, I don't know, like a hockey goalie or something. I'll just be like, I don't know about this. I don't care about it as a cultural enterprise, but the story is compelling. The story makes me interested, right? And so it sounds like that's what you managed to do, which is awesome.
I tried. And then the only downside of that was it came out in the summer of 2020. So it was very hard to promote in the sort of more traditional ways. Obviously, there was no book tour. The entire world was closed with COVID. So we did the majority that I could online. But again, my social footprint or digital footprint wasn't as big as I wished it was on, at the time, Twitter, because I had been in grad school for so long. And so I really hadn't been doing the kind of day-to-day work on social media that I really needed to have a sort of bigger...
Elevating the platform
and it's really fascinating.
Sundry activities.
Yeah, it's fascinating because my shift to AFI, I intentionally went from Bloomsbury, which is, one of the big five publishers, to an indie publisher. Intentionally, because I wanted to build my own fan base and market myself as somebody who's done this in the past. And I have to say, it was a hard sell to do AFI because I was one of the first 3 in the series. So he does similar to 33 and a Third. He does a series on bands, but they are biographies. They're also short. They're 40,000 words. They're not intended to be encompass the whole band's life or like everything about the band, but they are sort of supposed to be a short look at them. And so Brainiac was the first one, De La Soul, I believe, was the second one, and I was the third. And they really had sort of wanted me to do a band like Pavement or a Sub Pop or the bands that I feel as a woman get talked about, maybe almost over talked about in music criticism. So I wanted to talk about a band that I felt gets a lot of blowback in terms of criticism, but managed to change their sound every time and not lose the fan base. So it wasn't like they got into a certain level of albums and people are like, can you just play the hits from 2004? It's a very rare band that can continue on for, I guess at this point, over 30 years and never have had a day job. And never
I guess that takes a lot of really meaningful relationship between that band and, say, their fan base, right?
Yes.
Cultivating it, taking care of it. I mean, that's what I see, with Hot Water Music and Quicksand and Avail and whatever, all these current kind of post-hardcore dudes, is that they really do a lot of integration. They're very mindful of how they engage with their fans. And I think they picked a lot of that stuff up from these sort of earlier acts with integrity, such as AFI, right? Who are practicing that stuff. So to me, your role in that is vital. Your role in that is vital in terms of sort of capturing some of that narrative, some of that, knowledge, and maybe sharing that out a bit, right? So good for you for standing up for a project you believed in and sort of taking it to the next level.
Well, yeah.
What was your favorite part about writing the current book, if I may? I mean, just what aspect of it singularly did you enjoy the most?
First of all, I enjoyed all of it. I am not one of those people who finds the writing process tedious. I do find it tiring. I am not great at deadlines.
Bitch about it, like, fuck that. Just
no. I
am never without a clue about what to write. I don't know how other people roll. I suspect they're the same way, but
it's not about the writing so much. It's just the process to me is endlessly interesting. Even the editing, even the everything. And I feel very blessed. It's probably my age that I get to have a space to do this. And so I am always thankful for it, even though I am in the middle of nowhere. It feels like a lot of times. And it's very isolating. It is, the amount of times I talk to myself is
well, I'm in a place called Fort McMurray, Alberta, Canada. And I'm telling you, I think we have that in common. We're talking about isolated. We're talking about rural. For sure. Yeah, that's something that we have as sort of an interesting Venn diagram relative to the program.
Yeah.
That to me is interesting.
Yeah. So you
Um,
asked my favorite part
so
about
I mean, again,
it. Can I answer your
yeah.
question?
What did you like? What was fun? What I mean, what aspects of it kind of land is just kind of like I enjoyed, this particular part of it. It was super
Oh,
fun. I'd like to tell people,
can I answer your previous question though? Because I think that was fascinating.
please.
Okay, so
Okay.
you asked me what was the most interesting part, and I have to say, hands down. So I did a ton of studying when they were in the sort of their MySpace era. Actually, there are these how-to books. You probably have them in Canada, like how to uh, code a website or how to I don't know, like throw a party. They're yellow. They're sort of instructional. They're sort of like one and done books.
Gnarly, early pre-meta technologies online
Yes.
stuff to me is
Yes.
endlessly fascinating. I
So they have
love
a
that.
how-to MySpace, how to create your MySpace page book. And in there, AFI is the book or is the band that they use. And like
What?
at one time they were MySpace's biggest band. And I was fascinated by
What?
not so much that like they were always early adopters of the internet, but they were not the most internet savvy necessarily. But they
So
did
so
it.
can we chronologically can we put a year on that?
Oh,
Just
sure.
roughly speaking.
So they actually did have a GeoCities. I think they 98, somebody in AFI will certainly affect me, I'm sure. And then they
Okay.
transitioned to their own AFI.net really early, like super early. I want to say 99, 2001 maybe. And then they allowed the fans to they did this thing where they decided like our fan base is really important to us and people are going to feel like we're sort of transitioning because Sing the Sorrow is about to come out. We're on this major label. That's one of the reasons they wanted a more professional site. And we're about to become kind of like a big deal out of this small scene. But they had seen what had happened to bands like Jawbreaker and Green Day and bands that had come from the Gilman scene that kind of got a lot of blowback from the scene about selling out, which was a thing that the kids don't care about anymore. But if you grew up in the 90s, a lot of people did. And so
I
they wanted
was mindful of that stuff. That was just like, man, pre-digital. You have to understand, man, your phone is plugged into a wall in your house. Your TV shows you shows when it wants to. You have to schedule his shit around it. You have to go to the record store physically to buy a CD, unwrap it, put it in your CD player, listen to it. Like it was just that whole gnarly early pre-digital era. I look back on that stuff with fondness at this point, quite frankly. Maybe
right.
you
It's
or don't,
nostalgia
but
for us. Yeah, I think, and
seriously,
so
right?
they allowed their fans to create a name for themselves. So like Swifties created Swifties and the Bayhive created the Bayhive. They allowed them to do
That's
that. And
cool as
then
hell.
they named the site that, and then they sent out packages. So like you would get something in the mail that said you're part of the Despair faction, and it came with like a patch and a shirt and like a number, an actual membership card. So you sort of felt part of something and part of the community. And then before the album came out, they started what we would call today as like dribbling out Easter eggs on their site, talking about the new album and talking about sort of like secret shows that were coming up here and there. And at first, the MySpace kids were or the kids that were on their site were like finding it and then going into MySpace. And for people like me who lived in like this wasn't at the time, but in the 80s, I also grew up in a small part of Massachusetts, and I didn't have a lot of people who were into shows, and Boston didn't have all ages shows like DC did. And so to go, you'd either go to the Rat and dress up and try to see the heavy metal bands in Boston,
I've heard that
or
place.
you could, we
Yeah.
didn't have like an online space where you could find other people like you. And so MySpace created this with music at the center, a place where kids could put in their zip code originally. This is not part of what MySpace became
I,
later, but you put in
I've
your
kind
zip.
of heard Alkaline. I've kind of heard Alkaline Trio as being kind of mentioned as a band that kind of ran with that a bit early. I mean,
Yeah,
I haven't become a fan of their music since more than the past 5 years, but
yeah,
when I
they
kind of
did.
look
They
back
were
at
all
their
part of
kind of
this.
previous history,
Yeah, so like I
yeah,
think kids would call this like second wave emo, after sort of like
there we
the
go.
rites of
That's a good
spring,
term. I
first
like
wave
that. That's
emo.
good.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think for women and kids who, again, not a term that we would have used at the time, but kids who are queer identifying, this was like a much safer space than the pit, which was not always a safe
Totally.
space. And the pit and the band had gotten a lot of, I mean, if you went to an early AFI show, it would not be strange to hear homophobic slurs hurled at Davy from the pit. And I think the split about people who really fervently like dislike certain aspects of the band and people who like also fervently love aspects is in equal measure. And I was fascinated by that. So it was interesting to have this space where I felt like all of a sudden it opened up them wider to a group of people that felt maybe a little bit on the fringes of punk, or especially post-hardcore punk, and now had a space where like they could find others like them. And so I think they, some of this was just right time, right place. Some of this was really like leaning into their fan base, and some of this was a group that wasn't really being served at the time, I think.
Well,
So
it just seems like it's interesting how with these bands and with the associated fandoms, that I mean, it sort of becomes something where it just becomes sort of its own cultural momentum. And so if we're talking now, right, we're talking 25 years past, the birth of the mainstream internet or whatever it's been. And we're looking on back at this as like historically interesting for sure. And we're also looking at it as like early adopters of innovative ways of engaging with fans multimodally. And that's just part of the, package. That's part of the whole package, right? The music
well,
recording is part of the package, the people involved, all of it. And you're
I
sort of
mean,
talking
think
about
of
sort
like,
of ground zero at what's proved to be a very pivotal time and a paradigm shift relative to popular music. You're talking innovative, credentially heavy, awesome early adopters of stuff, all the while putting out some seriously lit guitar-based music, right?
yeah, and I think we were talking about Discord earlier, and especially Ian's sort of philosophy and ethos. Like the idea there was to shrink, the stage to the audience. Like the 70s had this sort of like you have to be sort of masterful at your thing, and even Suicide, their scene wanted to make like the audience and the band sort of on equal levels, and that you could talk to the band, get off the stage, and you could talk to them.
Integration. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think the
dope.
internet did that again. Like, so it came about again where on early social media platforms before the algorithm really took over, you could talk to the band. Like all of a sudden you didn't need to go through layers of publicists, and you could get Davey Havok responding to your stuff, and you could get the lead singer of Alkaline or whomever, if they were
I've
internet
had
savvy and whatever.
come at people with through their DMs sometimes, just say, "Hey, I'm a guy. You want to talk?" And I get the most interesting, varied range of responses. Sometimes it's cool. Other times, just like they don't want to know who you are. Other times, you get blocked just for saying, "Hey, I like your band. Here's Garfield." It's funny.
But that's like a
So the
modern phenomenon
gatekeeping
that
is
wouldn't
kind of
have happened back in the day. You know what I mean? Like that's such a
yeah,
modern phenomenon.
right.
There's no blocking in like 2004.
Blocking, sensitivity blocking. I mean, just like, oh, I'm sorry to cut into your t-shirt business. Anyway, that's something else. So I guess if I may, I mean, again, sort of now kind of jump to where you're at and to jump to where the band at, and being mindful of the fact that we're 43 minutes into a recording here. I'm enjoying this stuff immensely, sort of the cultural context. I mean, how early on in your life did you realize writing and or music were going to be something that you were involved in? And I mean, just can you look back at any sort of moments, sort of, teenage you or early years you? Because for me, I mean, I've been a literary dude since I was 5 years old. I consciously remember deciding it. I know that's not the same for other people. I know people kind of got their own ways through stuff. I'm very fascinated about creativity on its own sort of terms. And I guess I'm just sort of wondering, at what point in your life did you go, okay, this sort of nexus between language, communication, bands, music, when did you sort of realize your own sort of way through with that, if I may?
I mean, I always love to write. I think part of my interest in music, I mean, I always loved music as a kid. I think part of it is also I'm dyslexic, and I had no trouble learning songs, but I had more difficulty sort of with actual language and spelling in particular. You'll appreciate this. When I was a kid, I tried out for You Can't Do That on Television, a famous Canadian show. And I tried
Oh
out,
my God.
yeah, where you get
Really?
slimed. Yeah. So I think I did Gloria
That
S.
is sick. That is
I
some
did
sick Canadian legit pop culture stuff right there. I'll tell you
I
what.
did a
Just
Gloria Estefan song that I think is on the Top Gun soundtrack. And Anything But You, I think, is the song that I did. I'm sure the tape exists somewhere. I actually snuck out from school, sorry, Mom, to dance on Dance Party USA in the 80s. I was a big fan of MTV. I was part of the MTV generation. And so, like, part of my life about music was also about the visual and experience and the community. I mean, I just always dreamed of being as cool as the dancers on I didn't,
yeah,
Club TV is a
100%.
little bit later
We
than
got much music up here, or had,
I
but
loved.
same
I
deal.
loved much music as well. Yep.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think those are sort of formative things in my, but images and music for me always were sort of part and parcel. And so part of writing biographies and the colorful histories of bands has always been part of what I'm interested in.
That is absolutely sick. And I mean, again, I just, I got kids of my own. I just have, teenagers in my life who are kind of doing their own thing. I've taken a very active posture towards my keeping music and writing as things that are just active part of my day to day. My kids are into basketball, my kids are into drawing and, football and, a whole other range of interests. I like when I see, right, contemporary current bands, having somebody like you, right, associated with sort of documenting the longer term endeavor and sort of, I don't call it legacy maintenance, but maybe it's sort of like, here's where we're at up until the point this thing was sort of collected. This person, this writer, is a sort of legitimate observer, person, participant within the wider community, sort of breaking it open and sort of sharing it out to people who might not otherwise know, right? Cultural curation is a serious, it's an honor. It's an honor to be part of that stuff, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
And so, seriously, having your kind of academic role, which gives you the latitude to sort of follow up on those seriously significant cultural meaningfully projects, and all the people who are creative, because I mean it's never just a band. It's like the guy who does the art, the artwork. It's the person who runs the label. It's the person who runs the lathe where they do the screen cutting, which makes its way into the special vinyl release. So many like arts and cultural sub kind of industries are bundled into all of these outputs, right? Culturally speaking. And so the cultural legacy, maintenance, curation, and sharing, which you, Andy, are a vital part of, to me, that just looks like a fascinating, rewarding place to be at this point in, a life, right? With this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just talked a lot there. I just kind of inserted my own tangent on the thing. We are kind of running a bit low on time. I don't want to say low on time. I never like to say that. We've been chatting here, I think, very interestingly. I'm enjoying this a lot for almost 50 minutes. I mean, again, right? Just in terms of anything else, I suppose, from an informational or cultural or any other kind of standpoint, is there anything that we haven't talked about that perhaps you might be interested to share with people who, again, may be encountering either yourself or these musical artists that we've been talking about? Any final thoughts or ideas you'd care to share before we kind of wind down the recording, in a manner of speaking?
Oh, ideas I want to share. I mean, I always say go support your local bands. Their tickets are outrageously expensive for everything else, so go support local bands. You never know when Turnstile is going to turn into capital T Turnstile. They were playing little places about 2 years ago when I wrote about them in AFI, and now they're playing baseball stadiums.
Well, and this is where, I see bands like Blink 182 carrying a lot of weight, right? It's like, I don't necessarily listen to Blink 182, but I know that Blink 182 had Turnstile open for them on a friggin' major international tour. And now you could even argue that among the youth cohort, Turnstile has a very high profile. They're putting their latest record out as a friggin' film, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, like I
It's
said,
going
they're
into
playing
movie
baseball
theater.
stadiums in America. It's huge. It's a huge leap.
Right.
But yeah, so I always say go see your local bands. You never know. I saw Chapel Roan in a tiny place here in Charlottesville, Virginia. I also, so what I'm working on currently is the oral history of the 930 in time for their 50th anniversary in 5 years. It is their 45th anniversary. If anybody is in the DC area, I highly encourage you to see the photography exhibit for the 45 years of DC's punk rock. Jim Saw, obviously the longtime Discord photographer, is the first up. I think there's a series of film people and photography people that are going to do exhibitions, but Jim's is the one that is currently up. I am going next Friday. I feel very honored to go see Jim's stuff again. And
Awesome.
part of that is, like you were saying, that it takes a real community of people to come together to make things happen. And the project is going to live in a book form, but also as part of the Oral History Project in Washington, D.C. and the DC Punk Rock Archives. We lost our sound manager, who was so beloved by the community in DC and was, the sound guy for Fort Reno, for people who follow the Discord stuff, and also the sound man for the 930 Club since its inception. And he passed away tragically in 2023. And for me, it was a real impetus. It's something I've always wanted to do, but also we're losing voices. People get older, they're not going to be with us. It's important to me to capture them while we still have them. So part of what I am doing is collecting a lot of the stories of the club over the last 50 years.
That is such a vibrant, vital, significant thing to be doing at this stage in the relative history of that ongoing, meaningful, powerful sort of era of music, right? As it kind of makes its way through these years, through the people who were part of it, beginning when they were like 12 or whatever years old.
Yeah.
Sort of doing that now, at the level where people are at, 55, 60, wherever people are at with this stuff now, right? Give or take.
Absolutely.
I just turned 47. I mean, this music has been part of my life since I was a child, in whatever way. So again, I just, feel like, the thoughtful literary nonfiction and or creative nonfiction and or just whatever you can do to document the music around you while it's going on. It's just such a powerful thing to be part of. And you're doing such a frigging fantastic, amazing, interesting job with that. I'm really deeply grateful that you've chosen to spend a bit of time here on the Writers on Writing,
For having
the
me.
WOW, part of a highly lit, highly non-monetized at this point cultural enterprise. And again, much appreciation, Andy, and respect for joining us. Anything else you want to say here before we hit the end record button?
No, thanks for having me.
I have enjoyed this immensely. Everybody, you got to check out both of Andy's published books. You got to visit her author's website. You got to visit her academic website. I'm putting links to all of it on the contextualizing blog post. You got to check it out. You got to share it out. Thanks everybody for checking this out. This is actually going to be stunt production out the door around midnight my time in the next 5 or 6 hours, the very same day that we are recording this. Might be tomorrow morning, give or take. But in any way, folks, this is making its way out to you contemporaneously. So again, Andy, much appreciation and respect. Thanks everybody for checking this out. Bye for now.